Ezego of Ihiala. His expansive country home in Ihiala was said to be worth a fortune. His entire real estate outside Ihiala was valued at about $500 million naira, an unbelievable amount at the time. At only the age of 25, he was said to be the youngest billionaire in Nigeria, and he remained so from the late 80s to the early 90s. However, in 1999, he was tragically assassinated under mysterious circumstances. The details of his death are still unclear, but right after his death, rumors swirled about the enemies he had made due to some of his business dealings, and that this may have led to his assassination. However, no one was ever formally charged or convicted in connection to his death, and the case remains unsolved to this day. But is that all there is to his story? Another unsolved high-profile murder? Well, not exactly, because this man's life was even more mysterious than his death. How many billionaires do you know who dropped out of grade school, joined a gang of armed robbers, escaped the police, ran away to Lagos, and in less than a year acquired their billionaire status? This isn't a typical wealthy billionaire story. This is the story of Victor Okafor, the Ezego of Ihiala, a Nigerian businessman who is said to have made his fortune through a pact he made with the devil himself. Subscribe to our channel if you want to find out more. Victor's story begins at Uzuakwa Primary School, where he would receive elementary education. After Uzuakwa, he moved to Abbott Boys Secondary School, Ihiala, but didn't spend much time there as the notorious Victor Okafor dropped out to focus on making money on the streets, which eventually led to him joining a gang of thieves. I'm talking armed robbers with guns and all. This robbery gang would raid the Onitsha market and take anything they wanted. They showed traders hell until one day, their reign was cut short by a police raid that led to the arrest of each and every single one of them. Fortunately, Victor escaped. It seems like this experience really affected Victor in so many ways. He ran into hiding and eventually appeared in his father's house at Umumeni, begging to be kept safe. Victor's father didn't only throw him out, he disowned him and told his son to never come back. Traumatized, he made his way to Umuduru, his mother's village, to live with his grandmother. However, Umuduru was a different place. The village moved slowly with no excitement, no thrill as in the life he was used to. On top of all that, his grandmother was poor and could not afford to give her grandson the life he would have wanted. When you think about it, Victor couldn't have been satisfied at Umuduru. I mean, this was the boy who planned heists and robberies from an early age. This village life just wasn't for him. Soon, news of a small city with tall buildings and fast cars began to spread. This city was touted as a land of opportunity. The women were beautiful and the land was rich. And there it was, the possibility of starting afresh in a city far away from Onitsha, where the police would never be able to find him. It didn't take long before Victor left his poor grandmother and moved to Lagos. In 1989, Victor arrived at Lagos with nothing to his name except the clothes on his back. And this is where everything becomes foggy. You see, in the few months that followed, it seemed like Victor went underground. We searched deeply but couldn't even find any information about a person called Victor Okafor on the internet or anywhere. All of a sudden, after a year had passed, the name Ezego started becoming popular. To everyone's surprise, he had already become a multi-millionaire and a prominent aristocrat. Right there in Lagos, he built the Ezego shopping complex on Allen Avenue, which also had a branch in Abuja. Then, he founded the Ezego Plaza on the Murtala Mohammed International Airport Road. From these spots, he managed and controlled one of the biggest electronic stores in Nigeria. Victor Okafor had other companies all over. Some of them were Vic Winners International Limited, Ezego Nigeria Limited, Ezego Holdings Limited, Vitex Zinc Co. Limited, and Ezego Properties Limited. Ezego also built several houses, villas, and mansions all over the country. One of his houses was said to have been entirely made of glass. Not just any glass, bulletproof glass, and this was the 80s. By the year 1999, Ezego had amassed so much wealth that his real estate fortune outside Ihiala was valued at about $500 million naira. His country home in Ihiala alone was worth 500 million naira, with all the marble on the walls and on the floors directly being imported from Italy. That's not all. Ezego had one of the largest private car garages in all of Africa. The man loved his cars. His garage alone was valued at almost 1 billion naira. He once paid 14 million naira just to acquire 2 luxury cars. The naira was about 20 naira to the dollar at the time. You're probably there still wondering, how did a secondary school dropout move from the village to Lagos and in the space of a year amass all of this wealth? Well, you see, the mystery of Ezego's wealth has sparked an unending debate with 2 prominent sides of his story. On one hand, it is believed that Victor Okafor made a deal with the devil at a shrine known as the Okija Shrine, where he traded his life to gain wealth for a short period of time. On the other hand, some people think Ezego's rags to riches story has nothing to do with shrines and priests. However, they believe that he was a serial con man. Because back in 1989, when he arrived in Lagos, it was said that Ezego started out as a scammer who would scam people of their money by making them make advanced payments but never fulfilling their orders. So here is how it supposedly worked. Ezego would advertise expensive cars, real estate and landed property worth millions to potential buyers. When the buyers seemed interested, he would create false documents to convince them that the property were his. Once the unsuspecting buyers had bought the lie, Ezego would ask for an initial deposit, emphasizing that there were a lot of serious offers for the property, so they could lose it if they didn't pay a deposit. Once they paid that money, they never heard from him again, ever. Although none of this can actually be confirmed, it remains the most plausible explanation for Victor Okafor's rise to fame. It's either this or the devil in the shrine. Ezego was smart enough to invest all of his money into the electronics supply business, which was growing rapidly at the time, and this would eventually become his biggest source of wealth. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, if you were looking for the newest inventions in electronics, you could only find them in Ezego stores. So yeah, the Nigerian economy was good. Consumers had a higher purchasing power, and Ezego had the products that everyone wanted. So it's okay to say that it all adds up, right? Well, not exactly. The problem was that the amount of money Ezego was spending on cars and his real estate fortune still couldn't be explained by the profits he was making in his electronics business. The man spent dollars generously. He bought all his cars in dollars, shipped directly from abroad, and just parked them up in his mansions. His houses were built with state-of-the-art materials, and the architecture in many of his mansions was ahead of its time. But soon, all that wouldn't matter. On the 23rd day of December in the year 1999, Ezego was on his way to his hometown, Ihiala, for his usual triple celebration, his birthday, Christmas, and New Year. The celebration was going to be the most exciting galore of the year, with some of the most sought-after musicians in Nigeria billed to entertain the guests. Afrobeats maestro Femi Kuti and his Positive Force band were among the entertainers scheduled to perform. Ezego had planned to fly either to Enugu or Port Harcourt, from where he would be driven in a convoy to Ihiala, but the fatal rates of air crashes during the period had made him change his mind. Instead, he decided to drive himself from Lagos to Ihiala in a convoy of 6 of his finest automobiles, including a Lincoln Navigator 1999 model, a limousine, a blue Porsche, a Lexus Jeep, a Cherokee Jeep, and the latest Honda. The first trouble started when the Cherokee Jeep's engine became faulty along the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, but Ezego was in a hurry and couldn't entertain the idea of missing his schedule. He decided to keep managing the Jeep until it broke down completely in Delta State. Ezego was obviously in distress because his people were waiting for him back home, and the carnival would start in earnest. He bellowed at one of his boys to purchase a chain to tow the Jeep, which he then attached to his Lexus, insisting on towing the broken-down vehicle all by himself, with him driving the Lexus and pulling the Cherokee. As they approached a spot between Ozabulu and Okija on the Onitsha-Owerri Road, just 2 kilometers away from Ihiala, death unveiled its dreadful figure. Ezego reportedly ran into a damaged portion of the road while going down a steep slope and stepped on the brakes, catching the driver of the Cherokee behind him unawares. The driver was not prepared for the sudden stop and suddenly rammed into Ezego's shiny Lexus, sending the billionaire tumbling down a deep ditch by the roadside. Other reports stated that it was actually the towing chain between the 2 Jeeps that snapped, forcing the Cherokee at the rear to ram into Ezego's Lexus and send him plunging into the horrible ditch. His convoy was thrown into pandemonium, and those in his convoy made frantic and desperate efforts to get him out of the ditch and to the hospital. By the time they finally succeeded in getting Ezego out of the ditch, he had sustained a deep gash and his face was massively puffed up and wickedly disfigured. He was rushed to the nearest Lady of Lourdes hospital, where he had incidentally made a donation of 15 million naira a few years before the accident. The fate of Ezego hung in the balance as he fought for his life, and his family, friends, and well-wishers waited anxiously for news of his condition. As the medical workers frantically worked to save Ezego's life, the air was thick with tension and fear. They knew that this wasn't just any patient, but a mentor and generous giver. Yet, despite their best efforts, things took a turn for the worse. There was no doctor on duty to help them navigate the crisis, and as they waited for help, Ezego's condition deteriorated rapidly. Blood seeped from his mouth, his body went into shock, and all attempts to stabilize him failed. It was a race against time to save this beloved man's life. Desperate to find a solution, Ezego's family members urged the medical team to transfer him to a better-equipped hospital in Port Harcourt. Details of what happened next are hazy, and it's unclear if Ezego passed away on the way to Port Harcourt or while being prepared for a flight to Lagos. The only certainty is that Victor Okafor, the Ezego of Ihiala, tragically lost his life on Boxing Day at the young age of 34. As the years went by, the decay and neglect of Ezego's empire only seemed to intensify. The once beautiful Ezego Road was now a haunting sight, with vandalized streetlights and overgrown weeds that seemed to reach out and grab at passers-by. The entrance to Ezego Crescent, once welcoming visitors with heavenly trees and flowers, was now a foreboding gateway to decay and despair, and his once magnificent country home, now 15 years after his death, was a desolate shell of its former self, with parts of the glass house falling off and decaying, and the uncompleted duplexes still standing as they were when he left them. But that was only the beginning of the horror that surrounded Ezego's legacy. His lawyer, Barnabas Igwe, and his wife Abigail were brutally murdered in cold blood just 3 years after Ezego's own death. And with Ezego's will never read, the exact beneficiaries of his vast estate remained unknown, shrouded in mystery and suspicion. Some accused the former governor of Anambra State of being involved in the killings, while others whispered of a tussle over Ezego's will and property that could have led to the gruesome deaths of Igwe and his wife. Despite the passing of time, the dark aura surrounding Ezego's life and legacy seemed to only grow stronger. The whispers of murder and intrigue continued to echo through the walls of his crumbling estate, and the shadow of his once great empire cast a dark cloud over the community he once called home. Even now, years later, those who remember him cannot help but feel a shiver down their spine. Did he truly sell his soul to the devil? Did the Death Reaper come for his price? Or was it the karma from numerous scams that evened out? We may never know.